What is the worst pain you've ever experienced? Story 1. Kidney stone. I thought I had experienced significant pain before. I woke up twice while getting my jaw wired shut, and that was pure agony. The kidney stone blew every painful experience I've ever had right out of the fucking water. It took me less than 5 minutes after the symptoms started to soak through 2 layers of clothes with sweat. I stood on my back porch in single-digit weather and was still burning up. I went back inside, got dressed, and went to the ER, and by the time I got there, about 4 minutes, I'm not proud of how I drove, I had soaked through another set of fresh clothes that were still wet when I left the hospital 6 hours later. I sweat so much in that short period of time that it caused a dangerous electrolyte imbalance, and I spent the entire time in the ER in atrial fibrillation. So bad, so fucking bad. At least I have a new frame of reference for what pain really is. Story 2. Until recently, this would have been my answer. Then I had a tiny cut on my foot become go to the ER infected. Before long, I was wishing it was a kidney stone. The story. The Sunday before the Super Bowl this year, I knocked a knife off my workbench. Because there are no handles on a falling knife, I didn't try to catch it. But I apparently didn't get my foot out of the way. At first I thought I had just hit my foot with the handle, but then I got upstairs and pulled my shoes off to find a small, maybe 1 cm and not very deep. So I cleaned it up, put antibiotic ointment on it, and bandages it up. Kept it clean and bandaged until that Thursday night it was starting to look a little red and puffy, and it was definitely starting to hurt and get hard to walk with. Since I work in a medical facility, I took some time the next morning to see a provider before I clocked in. Yep, starting to look a little infected. Went home with antibiotics and instructions to get to a doctor or ER if the redness started to spread, and to keep it propped up as much as possible. Within 24 hours, just lowering my foot from the bed to below hip level caused excruciating pains to shoot up my leg. I had to use a cane just to hop to the bathroom on my other foot. By the morning of Super Bowl Sunday, it was starting to look better, but it still was painful. Then by about 4 in the afternoon, the redness and inflammation had tripled in size, and the wound was turning purple and black, and I could see my veins around it darkening. Definitely time to head to the ER. Ended up being fully admitted to the hospital for 2 nights and being given antibiotic cocktails 3 different ways. Orally 2x a day, belly injection 1x a day, and 6 bags of IV antibiotics over the course of those 2 days. According to the ER doctor, if I'd waited much longer, I could have had blood poisoning or even lost my foot. The whole time, every movement caused excruciating foot pain until the morning after the second night. So now my answer to the posted question is foot pain. Don't F around with foot pain. Story 3. Gallstone attack. That shit is real pain. And to make it worse, what they don't put in the brochure is that after you have it out, you can still get stones in the bile duct. Sneaky little bugger 3 years after removal had me in hospital with A&E, thinking heart attack. They had the emergency card out and everything. Oh no, eventually they found an 11mm stone in my bile duct. My explanation from the consultant was, "Meh, some people are just stone makers." Story 4. Ruptured ovarian cyst that was the size of a grapefruit. Because of its size, it started bleeding and leaking into my stomach, and my whole abdomen was so swollen with blood, I almost looked pregnant. They rushed me into emergency surgery and found another, unruptured cyst the same size on my other ovary and were able to remove it. While in the ER, they tried morphine and fentanyl, but they barely took the edge off, and I vomited several times from the pain alone. It made me nauseous to even sit up or try to move. They finally gave me multiple doses of Dilaudid after seeing the pain I was still in, and it finally started to work and numb everything out. To this day, I have never experienced pain like that. Like someone was twisting my insides with an electric knife over and over and over. Wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. Story 5. I was given Dilaudid after my gallbladder surgery for the 3 days I was still in hospital recovering. What a mistake! I left that hospital pretty much addicted to that shit and was frantically trying to figure out a way to get back in so they could give me more. I stuck it out for the next few days just fighting the urge. It was tough. Years later I met 3 different people. At 2 different jobs I had, they weren't good jobs either, who had to take methadone BC. They were all recovering addicts who were shooting up Ds for years and were lucky to be alive. I feel for all those girls, but damn, I'm so glad I was able to kick it before it even started. Story 6 can confirm one of the worst pains ever. The worst part was I went to the local ER, complaining of pretty severe pain, like tears streaming down my face, was told it's probably a kidney infection, given steroids, and sent home. Went back the next day in more pain than before, like crippled over in pain. The doctor tells me there is nothing on the CT scan and sends me home with Tylenol. The next day, I feel like I need to use the bathroom and stand up and feel a pop or snap of something inside my body and immediately hit the floor. It was excruciating. I couldn't walk. Made my sister drive me 38 miles to the town over while I was screaming in pain. Get to the ER, get another CT scan and an ultrasound. And turns out I had a giant hemorrhagic cyst on my ovary that ruptured and collapsed and hemorrhaged into itself. Luckily, I didn't have to have surgery, but was given some serious painkillers and bed rest for a week. I've had 3 babies, broken bones, and kidney stones, and this is right up there with uneducated labor for sure. Story 7. Dental abscess. It was a pain beyond description, and thanks to my malfunctioning immune system, I ended up in hospital fighting for my life. Story 8. I was on fire. Playing with fire as a preteen, I was burned on my inner thighs and arms. I don't remember the pain of being on fire, though. In the hospital, every morning the burns were scrubbed. That was excruciating. The worst was waking up in the recovery room after skin grafts from where they got skin from. That pain still strikes me when I hear the whoosh of a flame. Story 9. Appendicitis. It was basically like, oh, I feel kind of crampy, probably just a fart, I'll sleep it off. Then the next day it was like a dull ache. I worked, and when I got home, I could barely eat anything, no appetite. Then that evening at dinner, my mom was like, boy, you aren't eating. Do you need to go to the hospital? And I said, yeah. By the time we got to the hospital, I couldn't get up on my own. In a seated position, I couldn't lift my legs straight. It felt like Freddy Krueger had a hold of my guts and was squeezing it. Then, like 4 hours later, I woke up and the pain was totally gone, except for 3 incisions, which were mildly painful. Story 10. Had appendicitis. Went to the doctor, couldn't figure it out, complained of pain all over, not localized. Went home, and my family doctor called the next day and told my mom to take me to the hospital. Docs at the hospital couldn't figure it out either, so they did a laparoscopy and told my mom if it took longer than 30 minutes it was serious. Took them 4 hours. Guts were filled with peritonitis and gangrene. My appendix didn't burst, it leaked. Worst pain I could possibly imagine. Felt like being sliced open while on fire. 3 kids I knew, I was 12 at the time, had their appendixes removed while I was recovering. Maybe in solidarity? Every parent I knew wasn't taking any chances after my ordeal. Story 11. Gout. That shit was horrible. I have had plenty of bad injuries in my life and have a pretty high threshold for pain, and that shit had me crying from pain the one time I had it. I couldn't walk without searing pain. I couldn't even lay down with my foot in certain positions without intense pain. Couldn't touch it. I couldn't do anything with it. The morning I woke up on the first day of having it, I seriously thought I'd broken my toe in my sleep somehow. Story 12. Migraine. At first it hurt too much to walk because each step echoes in my head. Then it gets to be too painful to eat because chewing echoes too. Finally, I get to the point where it hurts too much to sleep. Before I found a doctor that believed me, I was in the emergency room twice for nearly 36 hours because I was in such pain that I couldn't function anymore. Story 13. Migraines really are the worst. I had emergency laparoscopic surgery for an ectopic pregnancy, and I'd much rather do that again than have a migraine. I didn't even take pain meds for my surgery. I didn't realize, but having regular migraines really messed with my pain scale. I also ignored a lot of pain leading up to my emergency surgery because IDK, I'm just used to ignoring pain. Story 14. I've had 2 natural childbirths. I had to have an emergency surgery because my gallbladder was about to rupture. I had very bad arthritis before I got the right treatment. I've had a miscarriage. I've been hit by a bus. Yes, really. I've been hit by a drunk driver who was speeding and it sent my car spinning. And I have once in my life experienced a headache that the doctor said was a migraine. Never in my life have I experienced anything as excruciating as that. It hurt to move. It hurt to see light. It hurt to hear anything. It hurt to breathe. I had to be carried to the bathroom to vomit from the pain. I live in constant fear of that happening again. I probably would have thought I was dying, but I was in too much pain to think. Story 15. Herniated disc. I was writhing on the couch for a full day and took so many ibuprofen that I gave myself a stomach ulcer. Would have gone to the hospital, but I literally could not move, and the thought of the agonizing pain of being moved onto a stretcher kept me right where I was. Story 16. Trigeminal neuralgia. Spent years on ineffectual medication for it. Wasn't until I admitted to my GP that I had come 2 seconds away from killing myself during the last flare-up that they really took it seriously. Thankfully, they put me on a different medication, have been flare-free for just over 2 years now. But the sheer fucking terror of it one day failing always lives in the back of my mind. Story 17. An attempted biopsy at my OBGYN office with zero painkillers or even Tylenol said it would be just a quick pinch. She couldn't get the needle very far into my cervix before I saw white and involuntary screamed. She tried once more with vigor but gave up because it wasn't happening, and I was clearly but quietly crying. I left the apt, tried to work, and ended up going home because I was in so much pain. Pain lasted for 2 days. I did eventually get the biopsy, but I had to be sedated and go into an OR. I consistently hear OBGYNs say that most women don't experience pain with the in-office biopsy procedure, but I have yet to meet a woman who has been through this procedure without experiencing horrific pain. Story 18. The kind of migraine that makes you feel like your head is going to explode. The upshot is sometimes the pain hits and lasts in such a way that the numb, cooling sensation afterwards is pretty intriguing, but by no means worth it. Like someone rubbed icy hot all over the pained parts of me, dang noggin. Story 19. Long ago, I'd have said impacted wisdom tooth removal recovery. Later, I'd have said ear infection. Then years later, I would have said natural childbirth. Twice. But then I had radiation therapy on my throat. 6 weeks, 5 times a week. By week 4, I wanted to die. Couldn't eat. Could barely swallow liquids, lost 20 pounds, and, even once I could eat again a month later, most taste senses. Couldn't manage cheese for like 2 years. You've no idea how important salivary glands are to chewing and swallowing foods. Wine and liquor were impossible for another year or 2. They hurt my tongue more than my throat. Story 20. Diverticulitis had me screaming and writhing around pretty good until they shot me full of fentanyl and Dilaudid, and kept me in the hospital for a week and a half. Hurt for a solid month even through my post-discharge pain pills. Story 21. Multiple infected interabdominal abscesses that I developed after gallbladder removal. It took all the doctors nearly 2 weeks to figure it out. That includes 2 ER visits, 2 days in the hospital, 2 visits with the surgeon's office, and my PCP. They didn't believe I was in any pain and didn't believe I had an infection since my white count was normal and I had no fever. The opiates they gave me for the gallbladder surgery only would take the pain away for like an hour, then it was right back. Once they figured it out, I had them drained under CT guidance. The fluid was sent for cultures. The initial results came back the next day. Got a call directly from my PCP. Yep, you have an infection, you need antibiotics ASAP. So that day I started the antibiotics. I was on them for 30 days. And a few weeks later, the fungal culture was positive. These take longer to grow. So I was on antifungals for 14 days. Doing a lot better now. I learned that if something doesn't feel right, to keep advocating for yourself, especially if you're a woman like me. Story 22. Kidney stones were pretty bad, but for me, the winner goes to ulnar nerve entrapment. Beyond rare instances where my ring and pinky fingers go numb, here are the normal weekly to daily, sometimes, occurrences. Tapping the nail of my ring finger results in excruciating pain that pulses through my whole body for anywhere from 30 seconds to multiple minutes, nearly causing blackouts. A persistent, dull ache in my ring finger. A persistent, dull ache between shoulder blade and spine. A persistent, dull ache at my elbow. Sharp, stabbing pain that simultaneously occurs at the tip of my ring finger, under my forearm just before the elbow, under the bicep, in my pectoral muscle, and at the top of my stomach. The feeling of fire or burning acid that just sits or races up and down my entire arm. Someone I know got surgery to treat his case, but it left a giant scar on his arm. Having so few beauty assets of my own, I decided to just deal with it and not add giant, hideous scars to my body just yet. Story 23, 24 hours after my C-section, I was in the worst abdominal pain ever, screaming that I wanted to die. Because I'd had a C-section a few years prior, I knew this pain wasn't normal. Every doctor tried to tell me this pain was normal, but finally one nurse believed me and fought to get me a CT scan. The nurse knew it was time-sensitive and didn't wait for the hospital to provide transportation literally across the street to where the CT scan machines are. It was going to be a 4-hour wait for transport, and that point it was around midnight. She wheeled me across cobblestones in a wheelchair, and every single movement was excruciating. It was worth it, though. Once the results came back in, I knew eventually I'd have a swarm of doctors in my room to take me to emergency surgery. It took a few more excruciatingly long hours, and attempts at pain management. Even Dilaudid didn't touch this pain, and eventually they did swarm in around 2 a.m. Apparently my OB left me open and bleeding after the C-section, and I developed a huge hematoma. Luckily, they were able to repair it, and as soon as I woke up from surgery, the pain was gone. This was a few years ago, and I still have very vivid flashbacks to this experience. I remember saying goodbye to my newborn and hoping I'd get to see them grow up. It was awful.